What's up guys, Asian here with another PTS Patch Notes. This is going to be the last one for the Stonethorn DLC PTS Patch Notes. Even though the DLC is being released 2 weeks from now on August 24th, Zoth has stated that this is the final PTS patch between now and the live release. So this one's actually pretty thin in terms of actually what it gives out, but they did, I'm not sure if this was intentional or not, but they did hint at a bigger rework coming on down the line, which we'll discuss briefly here in this video. So let's go ahead and get started here with the PTS patch notes. So there is an issue with Chokethorn. So for those guys who are still testing on the PTS, Chokethorn is back to its original values while lasting longer than intended, but it won't be this way by the time that the DLC actually launches in 2 weeks. Beyond that though, everything here is just pretty much rebalances here. The dungeons, for example, these are all just rebalances to the bosses. What we're really looking at is going to be combat and gameplay, and that is with Elemental Catalyst. So remember when we first discussed Elemental Catalyst when it was first released in 6.1.0, it was 6% critical damage taken per stack, up to 3 stacks, and they last for 5 seconds, which gave us a total of 18% additional critical damage taken. They nerfed that down to 5% per stack, so 15% critical damage taken, and now they reduced it to the anticipated 3% critical damage taken per stack. So now you can only get an additional 9% additional critical damage taken per stack, and each of these stacks only lasts for 3 seconds. While it is still possible to run this set on a healer, it might be better off to put it on a Magicka Necromancer. That spec is likely going to end up being the support slash buff bitch for kind of DPS classes, for DPS in general in Trials. Due to the changes with Master Architect and how the amount of Major Slayer gets scales off of ultimates, plus the fact that Necromancers do have reliable sources of all 3 different elemental types of damage, it just makes sense that you're going to be seeing Magicka Necromancers play that buff bitch role. A lot of the raid compositions that you're going to be seeing from Magicka are going to include 3 Magicka Necromancers, all of whom will be wearing Master Architect, and 1 of whom will be an Elemental Catalyst. Now, we did discuss how strong Elemental Catalyst would be if they did nerf it down to 3% per stack, so that much really hasn't changed. The only thing that kind of this changes is obviously the strength of the set, but also the fact that now Shadow is pretty much always going to be the best option. I did talk about whether you want to use the Thief or the Shadow in a prior video, and generally speaking, if you're running something like Mother's Sorrow, you're still going to want to run the Shadow, just even with the nerf to Elemental Catalyst. Prior to the nerf to Elemental Catalyst, Thief was still actually looking pretty strong across the board compared to Shadow, but with this nerf down, Shadow did get an indirect buff here. Now, the thing that I really want to touch upon here is the developer comment here that they included with Elemental Catalyst. So, I'm just going to read this out verbatim. Currently, the amount of critical damage, or I should say, the amount of critical chance in the game is relatively high for builds that aren't even specializing in it. You can easily obtain a large amount of passive sources rather than active or choice-based sources, such as choosing Precise over Nirnhone, resulting in this set being incredibly powerful across all levels. Our original intention was to let this set naturally balance itself once we do a larger patch on critical strike sourcing in the game, but after seeing much of the discussion on the set, we've decided to balance it around our current situation. In the future, once we have a better balance altogether with crit, we'll go back and adjust this set if need be. Additionally, the duration of the set made it too easy for builds to keep up without making active decisions around, such as running different enchantment sets or running it on specific classes that have a hybrid of damage sources. With a 3-second duration, it will now be much more difficult to keep the buff up 100% unless built for accordingly, rather than just activating Force Pulse here and there. So, first of all, let's talk about that last paragraph there. Additionally, the duration of the set made it too easy for builds to keep up without making active decisions around, such as running different enchantment sets or running it on specific classes that have a hybrid of damage sources. With the 3-second duration, it will now be much more difficult to keep the buff up 100%. I actually think that it will not be difficult to keep the buff up 100%, particularly if you're running it on a Magicka Necromancer. You already have fire damage from your light attacks, you have Graveyard for your frost damage, and then you have Siphon for your shock damage. Now, of course, this is dependent on whether Siphon actually works or not. We all know how Siphon is a little bit weird and clunky and might not necessarily go off when you need it to. But assuming Siphon goes off, It should be very, very easy to run it on a Magicka Necromancer, and you don't need to really make any sort of changes to your build in order to do so. I think that they made this statement based on the fact that for a lot of endgame players, we were considering using it on a healer and just have the healer use Force Pulse every 5 seconds. Honestly, I don't think the duration, 5 seconds, is not a particularly long duration in the grand scheme of things. It's sort of like in this middle ground here where it is on the shorter end of things where you do need to actively make sure that you are casting Force Pulse every 5 seconds, but it's not so long like Touch of Zens, for example, which lasts for 20 seconds, that you can just sort of just like do it once every 20 seconds or 15 seconds and just kind of forget about it. So I actually was pretty happy with the 5-second duration. It was short enough that you still had to actively work to get the 100% uptime, but it was not long enough where it was just sort of a brain dead sort of maintaining of the buff. But what's probably more important here is the fact that they have included the fact that they will be doing a larger pass on critical strike sourcing in the game. We already saw that they did tweak a little the numbers here and there, but they were fairly minor. So for example, Mother Sorrow got an increase of 14 crit strike chance, which is very, very small because you need 219 in order to go up 1%. So, less than a 1/10 of a percentage point here. But the fact that they did include this phrasing that they're doing a larger pass on critical strike sourcing does lead me to believe that in either update 28 or update 29, they are going to go back and basically, I don't want to say nerf crits, but they are going to take a pass on crits. Now, currently in PvE DPS meta, you are kind of focusing in on maximizing your crit damage modifier. And part of that is because the crit damage modifier will give you a little bit better return than just stacking raw weapon damage or spell damage. A lot of it has to do with power creep. There have been a lot of sets that have been introduced in the game that either just introduce just raw damage like Relequen, or just buff up your stats by a crap ton, for example, Sororia here. That's just a natural progression of power creep in a game that's about 6 years old now at this point. You expect that to happen with the power creep here. And because of that, your crit modifier, your crit strike chance, and your crit damage modifier, those actually do help out your damage the most once you have sort of kind of min-maxed everything else here. So the fact that they're going to be doing a larger pass on critical strike sourcing leads me to believe that they think crit might be a little bit overbalanced. That is, it is too overpowered, and they might be toning down how much crit chance you can get. So I'm not sure if that means they're going to nerf sets like Mother Sorrow or Advancing Okeda, especially after they just buffed these sets in this current update, or they're going to kind of change how critical damage is done. Now, the wording is critical strike sourcing, so I believe they might be changing things like how you get crits from your CP modifiers, probably, like the 12% you get from CPs. They might be changing how much you get from Major Prophecy or Major Savagery, things like that. They might actually be nerfing sets like Mother Sorrow, Leviathan, and Advancing Okeda. So it remains to be seen here, but it does sound like, based on the wording, that they're going to be taking a look at where critical chance is coming from, not necessarily critical damage modifier. That being said, critical damage modifier is going to be a little bit trickier to tweak because there's not too many sources of critical damage modifiers. It's your base 50%, then you have CPs, Major Amount of Force, you have a couple of class passwords that give you this, and now Elemental Catalyst as well. Critical chance, also not a whole ton. You get 10% base crit chance. You have Precise, possibly. You have Mother Sorrows and other sorts of sets. You have, obviously, your buffs, Major Savagery or Major Prophecy, for example. So critical, I'm not sure exactly where they would adjust sourcing. The biggest things would be just to nerf sets, obviously nerf precise perhaps, but it still remains to be seen. So expect update 28 to have these passes on critical strike sourcing, and expect crit builds to possibly be changed. We might see a change where we're going to be stacking weapon damage and spell damage rather than trying to maximize our crit damage instead. That pretty much concludes it for this patch notes video. There is going to be an announcement next week concerning the future of this channel here. I've already kind of alluded to it already, but spoilers alert, I probably won't be playing Elder Scrolls Online and probably won't be making content for Elder Scrolls anymore, but I do want to give you guys a little bit of a hint as to what I'll be using this channel for in the future. Expect that to come out next week. But hope you guys enjoyed. As always, link in the description below to the full patch notes if you guys want to check out the rest of the patch notes. And I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.